Let us talk about the India's latest export data. We are talking about this because different news websites are reporting that India's exports in the February fell by 8.8%. Meanwhile, the imports have also fallen. Let's talk about data. See, February was the third month when the goods exports, that means the mercantile exports, actually fell. We saw exports of around $34 billion in February, which shows a contraction of 8.82% compared to January. Meanwhile, imports of goods also fell to $51.31 billion in February. Now, even though both exports and imports have fallen, our trade deficit in February was $17.43 billion. This is actually lowest since January 2022. But we don't need to worry that much because in this current fiscal year, in the initial months, April, May, June, so on, the exports rose in a very good way. So from April till Feb, the overall exports, goods exports stand at $405.94 billion, which is 7.5% higher to corresponding period in last fiscal year. Corresponding period means April to Feb in 2021-22. So in this fiscal, we are seeing an increase. But imports have also increased in the same period to $653 billion, rising by 18.82%. So exports have risen by 7.5% in first 11 months of the current fiscal, but imports have increased by even higher, 18.82% in the first 11 months of current fiscal. Meanwhile, trade deficit during these 11 months was at $247.53 billion. But our overall current account deficit will be under control. See why? Because services exports have actually increased and their imports have declined. In Feb itself, the exports of services stood at $63 billion, rising by 7.81% compared to Feb 2022. Meanwhile, the imports in February of overall imports, including both services and the goods, like the 63 is also for both services and goods. The imports actually were at $65 billion, showing a negative growth rate. That's because services imports were under control. So overall exports at 63, overall imports at 65. Since we've talked about our current data, let's talk about data from Economic Survey also. India's share in world mercantile exports stood at 1.8%. In world commercial service exports at 4.9%. But the main idea is, the main number is this 1.8%. Our share in world mercantile exports is 1.8%, which is rising. This table is from Economic Survey. Our import performance in world mercantile imports, we contribute about 2.5%. Right. So what do we actually export? Major export items are machinery, transport and metal infrastructure, metal manufacturers, mineral fuels, lubricants, agriculture and allied products, chemical and allied products, gems and jewelry. What do we import? Petroleum oil and lubricants, capital goods, non-ferrous minerals, chemical elements and compounds, pearls, precious and semi-precious stones. Right? So we're exporting machinery, mineral fuels, agriculture, and we're importing petroleum oil. See, obviously petroleum, we import a lot of petroleum from Gulf countries. So where are we importing from? Around 13.8% from China. You must have read this number, that $118 billion. That's the value of our imports from China. Okay, and barely 17 to 18 billion dollars exports to China in goods segment, causing a major trade deficit for India, bilateral trade deficit between two countries. So 13.8% of our imports from China. Number 2, UAE at 7.5%, but their trade is actually balanced. In USA, from USA, 6.9% of our imports are sourced. Saudi Arabia 5.9%, and now Russia is also within India's top 5 import sources at 5.9%. Export destinations: USA, UAE, Netherlands, China also at number 4. But you see, China's share in India's exports is just 3.3%, but China's share in India's imports is 13.8%. Here USA is very important at 17.8%. Bangladesh is also important at number 5, the share of 2.7%. If you have any suggestions for me, please write in comments.